My sister Brittany slapped me across the face in the middle of the vault, and the sound echoed off the marble floors like a gunshot. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just stood there, my hand still clutching the velvet box containing the vintage sapphire necklace I had saved 5 years to buy. Brittany was screaming something about me being a thief, about stealing our parents' money, about how dare I spend $5,600 on myself when she needed a venue deposit. Her face was twisted ugly with entitlement, the mask of the golden child finally slipping in public. The security guard took a step forward, but before he could reach us, a man walked out of the private viewing room. He didn't look at Brittany. He looked at me. "Touch my wife again," he said, his voice low and cold as ice, "and see what happens." Brittany froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was absolute. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To understand why my sister felt entitled to assault me in public, you have to understand the architecture of my family. I wasn't just the middle child. I was the spare part. The ghost in the machine. My name is Gabriella, and for 27 years I have been the invisible infrastructure that kept the Vance family ego upright. My parents, David and Sarah, were socialites in the way that people who have more debt than assets often are. They were obsessed with appearance, with status, with being seen. And their masterpiece was Brittany. Loud, charismatic, beautiful Brittany. She was the sun and everyone else was just gravity existing solely to keep her in orbit. I was different. I was quiet. I liked old things, dusty books, forgotten histories, the smell of archival paper. I became an antique book archivist, a job my mother described to her friends as working in a library with a dismissive wave of her hand. They didn't understand it, so they ignored it. And because they ignored it, they assumed it had no value. They assumed I had no value. See, in a narcissistic family system, roles are assigned at birth and they are rigid. There is the golden child who carries the family's projected grandeur. That was Brittany. And there is the scapegoat, the vessel for everything the family wants to deny about themselves, their failures, their insecurities, their mediocrity. That was me. They needed me to be small so Brittany could feel big. They needed me to be the loser so they could feel like winners by comparison. It wasn't personal, it was structural. I was the load-bearing wall they kept drilling holes into, never expecting it to collapse. Growing up, if Brittany wanted a car, she got a brand new convertible. If I needed textbooks for college, I was told to be resourceful. When Brittany launched her third failed lifestyle brand, my parents mortgaged their vacation home to fund it. When I landed a prestigious fellowship to restore a 17th century manuscript in Florence, my father asked if it paid enough to cover my own airfare. It didn't matter what I achieved. In their narrative, I was the supporting character who existed to applaud the protagonist. So when I walked into the vault that afternoon, I wasn't just buying a necklace, I was committing an act of treason. I had spent 5 years secretly siphoning off money from my salary, putting it into an account my parents didn't know existed. I ate ramen. I walked instead of taking cabs. I mended my own clothes. I saved $5,600, not because I wanted jewelry, but because I wanted something that was purely, undeniably mine. Something beautiful that no one had given me, and therefore no one could take away. The necklace was of the 1920s Art Deco piece platinum, and sapphires with a provenance that linked it to a minor European royal house. It was history. It was tangible. It was real. And the moment I signed the receipt, the moment that velvet box was placed in my hand, I felt a shift. A crack in the foundation. I wasn't just the archivist anymore. I was a woman who could acquire history. Then Brittany stormed in. She must have tracked my phone, we were on a family plan I paid for, or seen the transaction notification on the joint account. I hadn't realized she still had access to monitoring. She didn't care about the history. She didn't care about the art. She just saw money. She saw resources that, in her mind, belonged to her by divine right. "You selfish little brat," she had shrieked, her voice shrill against the acoustic perfection of the showroom. "Mom and Dad are refinancing the house for my engagement party, and you're buying jewelry. Give it to me, we can return it." She reached for the box. I pulled it back. That was when she slapped me. It wasn't a slap of passion, it was a slap of ownership. It was a correction, a reminder of my place. But then Christian stepped out of the shadows. Christian Vance. I knew who he was instantly. Everyone in Chicago knew who he was. Real estate tycoon. A man who bought skylines and sold them for sport. He was 34, terrifyingly intelligent, and rumor had it utterly heartless. He stood there in a bespoke suit that cost more than my entire wardrobe, looking at Brittany like she was a stain on his shoe. "Touch my wife again," he said, and the air left the room. Brittany stammered, her hand falling to her side. "Wife? She's my sister. She's not married. She's nobody." Christian didn't blink. He walked over to me, his movements fluid and predatory. He placed a hand on the small of my back, a touch that was firm, possessive, and shockingly warm. He looked down at me, and for a second I saw something in his eyes. Not romance. Calculation. "Security," Christian said, his voice barely raised but commanding absolute obedience. Two men in dark suits materialized from the corners of the room. "Remove this woman. If she returns, call the police and file charges for assault." "You can't do this," Brittany screeched as the guards took her arms. "Do you know who I am? I'm an influencer. I'll ruin you." Christian looked at her with mild amusement. "You're a noise complaint. Get her out." They dragged her out. The heavy glass doors swung shut, cutting off her screams. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and thick. I stood there trembling slightly, Christian's hand still on my back. I waited for him to laugh. I waited for him to tell me it was a joke or a mistake, or that he had confused me with someone else. Instead, he turned to the store manager, who was looking pale and terrified behind the counter. "Give us the room," Christian said. The manager nodded and disappeared into the back office. We were alone. I looked up at him. "I'm not your wife," I whispered. "I know," Christian said. He dropped his hand from my back and stepped away, the warmth vanishing instantly. His face settled into a mask of professional indifference. "But you could be. For tonight?" I stared at him. "What?" "I was in the viewing room," he said, pacing slowly around the display case. "I heard you earlier. Before your sister arrived. You were correcting the appraiser on the provenance of that necklace. You noted the hallmark was pre-war Austrian, not French, and you identified the specific workshop in Vienna. You were right, by the way. He was wrong." I blinked. I read a lot. "It's my job." "Your job is details," Christian said. "You notice things. You remember things. You understand history not as a list of dates, but as a series of transactions and leverages." He stopped pacing and looked at me. "I need that." "You need an archivist." "I need a partner," he corrected. "Tonight, I am closing a deal on the Blackwell building. It's a landmark property. The seller is an 80-year-old eccentric who refuses to sell to developers. He hates modern money. He hates people who don't understand the soul of architecture. He thinks I'm just a suit with a checkbook." Christian leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I need someone who can walk into that gala tonight and speak his language. Someone who can look at a cornice and tell him the history of the stone. Someone who is quiet, observant, and unimpressed by noise." He paused, his eyes scanning my face. "Someone exactly like you." "And the wife part?" I asked, my voice stronger now. "The seller is traditional," Christian said. "He trusts family men. He doesn't trust bachelors. If I walk in there with a fiancé who appreciates history as much as he does, I get the building." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He slid it across the glass counter toward me. "Standard non-disclosure agreement. And a consulting contract. 1 night, 4 hours of work. You play the part. You charm the old man with your brain, not your body. You help me close the deal." I looked down at the paper. "And what do I get?" Christian didn't hesitate. $250,000. The number hung in the air. $250,000. That was 5 years of my salary. That was freedom. That was a new life. That was enough to never have to answer a text from my mother again. "Why me?" I asked. "You could hire an actress, you could hire a historian." "Actresses overact," Christian said. "And historians bore people. You have something else. I watched you with your sister. You didn't scream, you didn't cry. You held your ground. You have dignity. That's rare. And frankly," he gestured to the necklace box in my hand, "you have expensive taste for a librarian. I assume you could use the capital." Archivist the First corrected automatically. Christian smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was real. See details. Do we have a deal, Gabriella? I looked at the contract. I looked at the door where my sister had just been dragged out. I thought about the years of being the spare part, the years of being invisible. And I realized that for the first time in my life, someone was offering to pay me for exactly who I was. Not for my silence, but for my mind. I picked up the pen. Do I get to keep the necklace? If you sign, Christian said, I'll buy you the matching earrings. I signed. Good, Christian said, taking the paper back. Now let's go. We have 3 hours to turn you into Mrs. Christian Vance. And Gabriella. He paused, looking me dead in the eye. Tonight, you are not the shadow. You are the main event. Act like it. The transformation wasn't magic. It was logistics. Christian's team moved with the efficiency of a pit crew. Within 2 hours, the archivist in the cardigan was gone. In her place stood a woman wearing a structured emerald silk gown that cost more than my parents' car. My hair was swept up, exposing the line of my neck and the sapphire necklace that now felt heavy like a badge of office. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a princess. I saw a weapon. Christian didn't compliment me. He inspected me. Adequate, he said, checking his watch. Let's go. The gala was held in the atrium of the Blackwell building, itself a soaring cathedral of Art Deco opulence that smelled of old money and expensive scotch. The air was thin with judgment. This was a world where people didn't shout to be heard. They whispered, and the world leaned in. I felt the familiar urge to shrink to fade into the wallpaper. But then I felt the weight of the contract in my purse. I wasn't here to be liked, I was here to work. Christian navigated the room like a shark in a koi pond, cutting through conversations with surgical precision until we reached him. Arthur Blackwell, the seller. He was a man made of tweed and skepticism, holding a glass of whiskey like a gavel. He looked at Christian with barely concealed disdain. Mr. Vance, he drawled. I see you brought decoration. He glanced at me. I didn't smile. I didn't curtsy. I looked him in the eye. This is my fiancée, Gabriella, Christian said smoothly. She has a particular interest in your property. Is that so? Blackwell sneered. And what interests you, my dear? The square footage, the potential for a rooftop pool. The gargoyles, I said. Blackwell paused. I beg your pardon. The gargoyles on the north cornice, I said, my voice steady. They aren't standard limestone. They're carved from Indiana gray, specifically from the Bedford quarries. And the third one from the left isn't a gargoyle at all. It's a portrait of the architect's wife. He carved it himself after she died of influenza in 1918. That's why it's looking west. Toward the sunset, the silence that fell between us was different than the silence in the jewelry store. This wasn't shock, it was respect. Blackwell's eyes narrowed, then widened. He looked at Christian, then back at me. Nobody has noticed that in 40 years, he said softly. My father told me that story when I was 6. It's in the original blueprints, I lied. It wasn't. I had read it in a memoir of the architect's apprentice, a book so obscure only 3 copies existed in the state. I owned one. You can't sell this building to a developer who will sandblast that face, Mr. Blackwell. You need a steward. Christian understands that preservation isn't just about keeping the walls standing. It's about keeping the stories alive. I slipped my hand into Christian's. His grip tightened. Blackwell stared at me for a long moment. Then the ice in his eyes cracked. He let out a bark of laughter. Indiana gray. Well, I'll be damned. He turned to Christian. You didn't tell me she was a scholar, Vance. I thought you just hired a model. Gabriella is the historian of the family, Christian said, his voice filled with a pride that sounded terrifyingly genuine. I just signed the checks. Bring the papers, Blackwell said, draining his glass. Let's get this done before I realize how much I hate you again. An hour later, we were in the back of Christian's town car, the signed deed resting on the leather seat between us. The city lights blurred past in streaks of gold and red. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, sharp clarity in its place. I had done it. I had played the part. I had earned my fee. You lied, Christian said, breaking the silence. About the blueprints. I improvised, I corrected. The story was true. The source was different. You closed a $100 million deal with a story about a stone carving. He turned to look at me. The streetlights cast shadows across his face, making him look less like a tycoon and more like a man who had just discovered fire. You are wasted in a library, Gabriella. It's an archive, I said, automatically. And my contract is done. You can drop me at my apartment. No. I frowned. Excuse me. I don't want a fake wife anymore, Christian said. I want a head of historical acquisition. I buy old buildings. I need someone who knows what they're whispering. I need someone who can walk into a room and weaponize history. He picked up the deed, weighing it in his hand. Full-time, benefits, equity, and a salary that makes the $250,000 look like a retainer. I looked at him. I thought about my parents who were probably right now complaining about my selfishness to anyone who would listen. I thought about Brittany, who had never read a book she hadn't been assigned. I thought about the small, quiet life I had built as a fortress against their noise. I'm expensive, I said. Christian smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile for real. I can afford you. My apartment building was old, the kind with a buzzer that didn't work and a lobby that smelled faintly of dust and floor wax. It had been my sanctuary for 3 years, a quiet cave where I hid from the world. But when I walked through the front door at 2 a.m, still wearing a gown that cost more than the building's down payment, I knew that version of my life was over. I wasn't surprised to see them. I should have been, but I wasn't. My parents and Brittany were standing in the hallway outside my unit, a tableau of judgment and greed. They must have used the emergency key I gave my mother 4 years ago, a mistake I had forgotten to rectify until this precise moment. Brittany saw me first. Her eyes went straight to the necklace, then to the dress. She didn't look impressed. She looked vindicated, like she had solved a puzzle that had been annoying her all evening. I told you, she said to our parents. Look at her. She's wearing a costume. My father stepped forward, his face purple with the kind of rage that usually preceded a lecture on gratitude. Where have you been? He demanded. We've been calling you for 6 hours. I was working, I said. I didn't unlock my door. I didn't invite them in. I stood in the hallway, the silk of my dress rustling softly against the cheap industrial carpet. Working. My mother laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. She held up her phone. On the screen was a blurry photo from a gossip blog, me and Christian entering the Blackwell building. Is that what they call it now? We saw the pictures, Gabriella. Everyone saw them. Walking in with Christian Vance, a man who eats companies for breakfast. We know what you are, Brittany sneered. You're an escort. A high-end hooker. That's how you got the necklace, isn't it? You slept your way into a jewelry store and now you're sleeping your way through the Fortune 500. I looked at them. Really looked at them. For years, their disapproval had felt like a physical weight crushing the air out of my lungs. But now, it felt weightless. It felt irrelevant. They were projecting their own transactional nature onto me. They couldn't imagine a woman being valued for her mind, so they assumed I was selling my body. I'm not an escort, I said calmly. Don't lie to us, my father shouted, his voice echoing off the peeling wallpaper. You've embarrassed this family enough today. First the scene at the store and now this parading around town with a man like that. He took a breath, composing his features into a mask of disappointed authority. We're gonna fix this. You're gonna give us that necklace. We'll sell it to pay for Brittany's venue deposit. Call it reparations for the emotional distress you caused her today. And then you're coming home so we can get you help. Help, I repeated. For your lifestyle, my mother whispered, looking scandalized. We can't have a daughter who sells herself. I started to laugh. It bubbled up from my chest, cool and refreshing. You think I'm selling myself? You people sold me out for 20 years. You sold my confidence to buy Brittany's ego. You sold my future to pay for her mistakes. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the check. The ink was still fresh. $250,000. Look at it, I said, holding it up. My father squinted. His eyes widened. 200. Did he pay you this? It's a consulting fee, I said. For my expertise. Because unlike you, Christian Vance values what I know. Give it to me, Brittany said, lunging forward. That's dirty money, it's mine. You ruined my day. She reached for the check, but a hand caught her wrist in midair. It wasn't mine. Christian stood there. He hadn't made a sound coming up the stairs. He was still in his tuxedo, looking like a sleek, dangerous shadow in the fluorescent lighting of the hallway. He didn't let go of Brittany's wrist. He squeezed just enough to make her gasp. I believe I told you, Christian said, his voice conversational but deadly. What would happen if you touched her again? He released her and Brittany stumbled back into our father, rubbing her wrist. My parents looked at him, terror warring with greed in their eyes. This was Christian Vance. In the flesh, in their daughter's hallway. Mr. Vance, my father stammered, trying to straighten his posture. We were just disciplining our daughter. She's been involved in some unsavory activities. Christian stepped up beside me. He didn't touch me this time. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me, a united front. Your daughter, he said, is the new head of historical acquisition for Vance Global. Her starting salary is $300,000 a year plus equity. She just closed a deal that your entire net worth couldn't cover the tax on. My mother made a choking sound. Head of. But she's a librarian. She's an architect of history, Christian corrected. And she is done with you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. He handed it to my father. What is this? My father asked, his hands shaking. A cease and desist order, Christian said. Regarding the assault in the jewelry store earlier today, we have the security footage. We have witnesses. If any of you contact Gabriella again, if you call her, text her, or show up at her home, I will file criminal charges for assault and battery against your other daughter. And I will sue you for harassment. Christian leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a scream. And I have better lawyers than you. I have better lawyers than God. Do not test me. My father looked at the envelope, then at me. He looked small. For the first time in my life, I realized he wasn't a giant. He was just a mediocre man who had bullied a child to feel tall. Gabriella, my mother pleaded, her voice trembling. You can't let him do this. We're your family. I looked at them. I felt the weight of the check in my hand, the weight of the necklace on my skin, and the weight of the man standing beside me who had seen my worth when they refused to. Family doesn't steal from you, I said. Family doesn't hit you. And family doesn't wait in hallways to ambush you. I unlocked my door. Get out of my building. If you're still here in 5 minutes, Christian calls the police. I didn't wait for their answer. I walked into my apartment and held the door open for Christian. He stepped inside. I shut the door on their faces, and the click of the deadbolt was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The silence that filled the apartment after the deadbolt clicked was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was full of oxygen. For the first time in 27 years, I could breathe. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't need to see them retreat. I could hear the heavy, defeated scuff of their footsteps on the linoleum, the low hiss of my mother's weeping, the silence of my father's bruised ego. They were gone. Christian walked over to the window, looking out at the street below, giving me space without leaving me alone. I need 10 minutes, I said. Take 20, he replied, not turning around. I went to my bedroom. I didn't pack everything. I didn't want everything. I took my passport. I took my grandmother's first edition of Jane Eyre. I took the hard drive containing my portfolio. And I took the emerald gown I was wearing. I left the rest. The second-hand furniture, the clothes I had bought to look invisible, the photos of a family that smiled only when the camera was on, I left it all. It belonged to a woman who didn't exist anymore. There is a lie that society tells you, a sticky, sentimental trap that says you cannot divorce your biology. They say family is forever. They say blood is thicker than water. But they forget the full quote, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds you choose are stronger than the bonds you inherit. For years, I had treated my bloodline like a debt I could never pay off. I thought if I just gave enough money, enough silence, enough compliance, they would finally release me. But toxic families don't release you. They consume you. You cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. You have to amputate. I walked back into the living room with my single bag. I took the spare key off my ring and set it on the counter. It made a sharp clink against the cheap laminate. That sound was the period at the end of a very long, very sad sentence. Ready? Christian asked. I touched the sapphire necklace at my throat. It didn't feel like a costume anymore. It felt like armor, ready. We walked out of the building and into the cool Chicago night. The town car was waiting. I didn't look back at the window. I didn't look for their car. I got in, and as we drove away watching the city skyline expand before us, I didn't feel loss. I felt lighter than air. 6 months later, I was in Vienna. The project was a restoration of a Habsburg-era library, a massive undertaking that required navigating government bureaucracy, historical societies, and structural engineers. It was the kind of job I used to dream about while shelving paperbacks. Now it was my Tuesday. I was standing on the scaffolding examining a fresco when my phone buzzed. I checked it. It was a text from an unknown number, but I knew the area code. I knew the syntax. Gabriella, please. Dad's blood pressure is bad. The foreclosure is moving forward. We just need a small loan. We're family. Don't you miss us? I looked at the words. I remembered the slap in the jewelry store. I remembered the ambition in my mother's eyes when she thought I was selling myself. I remembered the silence of my childhood. I didn't feel anger. Anger is a connection. I felt nothing, just the cold, clean distance of a stranger. I didn't reply. I didn't block the number. I simply deleted the message. Everything all right, Miss Vance? My assistant asked from the floor below. I hadn't taken Christian's name in marriage, but in the industry, everyone knew I was the architect of his acquisitions. The name commanded respect. Everything is perfect, I said. I put the phone away and looked up at the ceiling where centuries of history were waiting to be revealed. I had pruned the dead branches from my family tree, and finally, for the first time, I was growing toward the Sunday. If you've ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you to find yourself, hit the like button and share this story. You never know who needs permission to choose themselves today.